We are very close to 9 o'clock. I think we'll wait a couple more minutes. We're still getting some folks joining. Want to make sure everyone gets on before we start. I plan on starting in 2 minutes. It looks like we're still getting a few people joining. We are still getting a few people joining, so I plan on starting right around 9:04. Oh, it looks like we've reached the maximum number here. We've got quite a few people who have joined us. Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you to this question and answer session on WAPA's recommendation to pursue final negotiations regarding the SPP RTO membership. Next slide, please. Let's see, we're going, sorry, there we go. Thank you. Yes, my name is Gary Hoffman. I'm the attorney advisor for WAPA, and today I will be your moderator for this question and answer session. Next slide, please. We do have a few housekeeping items. As you may recall, there was a public information meeting held 2 weeks ago on May 11th. The purpose of today's call is this is a question and answer session. and is providing an opportunity for stakeholders to ask clarifying questions about the April 17th recommendation report and the May 11th public information meeting. I'd like to point out to you some key items. The first one is the April 17, 2023 recommendation report. And then also for the May 11th, 2023 meeting, there was a presentation. It's a PDF. And there were also two different YouTube postings. One is a recording of that May 11th meeting, the information meeting. The other one was a question and answer session as part of that meeting. All of these are available on our website. Another housekeeping item for today is that this webinar is being recorded. If you do not want your image or voice recorded, you're welcome to submit questions in the chat rather than having your camera on and speaking. The video recording of this webinar will be posted. The court reporter is also transcribing this webinar. So if we could go to the next slide. So what is the recommendation? It's the recommendation for Western Area Power Administration's Rocky Mountain, or RM, region and the Colorado River Storage Project Management Center, also known as CRISP, to pursue final negotiations regarding membership in the Southwest Power Pool, or SPP, Regional Transmission Organization, RTO, and for the Upper Great Plains region, UGP region, to expand its participation. Presentations along with the associated Federal Register Notice, an FRN, the recommendation report I previously referenced, and supporting materials are posted on WAPA's website at the address shown on your screen. We can go to the next slide, please. WAPA published a Federal Register Notice on April 28th of 2023 regarding the SPP RTO membership. WAPA seeks public comment from its customers and stakeholders on the substance of WAPA's recommendation to pursue final negotiation regarding RM's and CRISP's membership in the SPP RTO and UGP's expanded participation. A decision about whether to pursue the recommendation will be informed by the comments received and will be posted to WAPA's website. So a little bit before we get to the question and the answer portion of this, I did want to comment or make a point to review the timing of the public comment period, the process for submitting comments, and the materials that are available to you. The public comment period began on April 28th, 2023 with the publication of the Federal Register Notice. It ends at 4 p.m. Mountain Time on June 12th, 2023. So how to submit comments? Please submit comments in writing by June 12th, 2023. It's either email or the postal address, which are provided in the FRN and also on the next slide that we'll get to. It's important to note that if you made comments prior to the start of the public comment period, you need to resubmit them in writing during the comment period in order for them to be considered. After the close of the public comment period, comments will not be accepted, will not be considered. So please get those in by June 12th, 2023. As to the materials that are available to you in assisting you when you want to form your comments, All those materials associated with this recommendation, including the recommendation report, the presentations, recordings, and supporting documents, are available at the WAPA website on your screen. In the last bullet there, WAPA will disclose other communications that occurred during this comment period regarding the RTO initiative by posting them on the website listed above. And additionally, just to let you know, WAPA personnel will continue to participate in public industry activities and discussions regarding markets. How to submit formal comments. They must be in writing. They must be received again by June 12th, 2023. Sorry to sound like a broken record, but that's to ensure consideration in WAPA's decision process. They should include the following information: the name and general description of the entity that submits the comment, name, telephone number, and email address for the entity's primary contact. And it would be helpful for us if there were identification of any specific element of the recommendation that the comment references. Those written comments may be submitted either via email to spp-comments@wapa.gov or by regular mail addressed to Rebecca Johnson, Transmission and Power Markets Advisor, Western Area Power Administration. The mailing address is 12155 West Alameda Parkway, Lakewood, Colorado, 80228-8213. And go to the next slide. Great questions. So this, the process that I will be following today and taking, and that our panel will be taking to respond to questions, is as follows. First, we're going to address the written questions that were received. And I will be reading those questions. We will have subject matter experts responding to those questions. If you have any thoughts or follow-up questions, we'd ask that you hold on to those for later in this question and answer session. You can ask them later. We'll talk about how you can ask them later. But first, we want to get through the written questions that have already been submitted. Once we get through those, if you have oral questions, you can raise your hand in the Teams page, and we will follow those and call on you. You can also submit questions in the chat that we will then next go to after we get through the raised hand questions. For the phone-only participants, we'll call on you at the end. If your phone is muted, it's a *6 in order to unmute it. But that's the process that we'll follow today. And again, if you could please state your name. We do have the court reporter taking in a transcript, so spelling your name would be helpful. The organization you represent. And if you have a question, we have here about a specific slide. I know there was the previous slide presentation from the May 11th process. If you know the slide number or other reference, that would be helpful for us. And then the final note I wanted to make was today's session is not to receive comments. It is to receive questions to help you get the information you need to help better form the comments that you'll be submitting in writing later on. Let's go to the next slide. As part of our process today, we've assembled a panel to respond to questions received. We've listed out some subject matter experts here, and for the folks that are just on phone, I'm going to read out who they are and their titles. They first are Crystal Dean, the Vice President, Enterprise Portfolio Management for WAPA. Myself, I'm Gary Hoffman. Rebecca Johnson, the Transmission and Power Markets Advisor. David Newmeyer, the Vice President of Power Marketing for the Rocky Mountain region of WAPA. Brent Osick, the Acting Vice President of Power Marketing, Colorado River Storage Project, or CRISP. Steve Sanders, the Strategic Electric Industry Restructuring Advisor for the Upper Great Plains region. We actually have two more individuals that we've added. We posted this presentation a week ago, as we said we would do, and we didn't have the other two on there. I apologize for that, but I'm going to introduce them verbally here. We have Pete Hyman, who's the Vice President of Transmission Services for RMR, CRISP, and DSW. DSW stands for WAPA's Desert Southwest region. The other additional panelist we have is Jonathan Ost, and he will be responding in his role as the Vice President of Power Operations for CRISP, DSW, and RMR. With that, let's go ahead and get into the questions. We did receive 12 or 13 questions, and we will be going through those if folks are ready. The first 12 questions were received from Joe Taylor, XL Energy, and we will be, I'm going to be reading the question, and we'll be calling on a subject matter expert to provide the answer. And again, if you have follow-ups or questions, additional questions, we'd ask that you hold those, keep track of them, and then ask them after we get through the first set of written questions. The first question is, describe how and why additional purchases made by WAPA to satisfy its hydro sales to preference customers should qualify for the Federal Service Exemption, also known as FSE. The second part of that question is, please confirm if the FSE exemption for firming purchases is only applicable to CRISP. There's a reference to page 37 of the recommendation report. I turn this over to Brent Osick.
Thank you, Gary. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Perfect. So good morning, everyone. I appreciate that question from Joe at Public Service Company of Colorado. So we have requested the CRISP-specific provision. CRISP is very specific to CRISP to allow certain purchases, purchase power, to be eligible for the FSC, the Federal Service Exemption, FSC. The reason why is CRISP has had a long history of using firming power to augment its hydropower resources, and actually have included firming purchases in our marketing plan. And additionally, the last 20 years of drought, or I suppose they're calling it aridification now, is certainly a climate change, have required us to think just a little bit beyond water and hydropower as we have traditionally, and trying to make sure we have a long-term viability for CRISP. So if long-term purchases are mandated, or maybe we are requested to integrate some type of purchase power with CRISP, we believe that it's reasonable that we should be able to integrate these purchase power amounts with our hydropower. And one caveat: this is not a kind of a wholesale, kind of a carte blanche type of exemption, but it is within the bounds of our existing marketing plan. And so the idea is that we would integrate to the extent possible, the extent that we needed to preserve the viability of CRISP moving forward, but there are boundaries upon it. Well, thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Brent. We're going to move on to question number 2. That question is, How will point-to-point transmission service by the SPP RTO-West be priced? The second part of that question is Colorado River Storage Project, CRISP or CRCM, priced differently than the other RTO-West transmission owners? References page 38 and 39 of the recommendation report. Brent, I'll hand this one back over to you.
Thank you, Gary. To answer that question, the transmission within one zone will be similar to what it is today and will be at the posted rate for that particular zone. So for example, if one entity buys transmission solely on the CRISP system, that we charge the CRISP transmission rate. For transmission service across multiple zones, then there will be an average of the SPP rate of all the west zone. So the same concept for a transmission rate calculation. It's the same as it is today, but on a larger scale for the zonal charge. So for an RTO, really the intent is to remove pancaking charges that today disincentivize bilateral transactions across multiple transmission providers. But I think kind of getting the second part of that question, just as today, CRISP has a slightly different transmission rate from other transmission providers. Every transmission provider is slightly different. So everyone has slightly different annual transmission revenue requirements and transmission use. So rates are slightly different from utility to utility, but the rate process to determine those rates is the same across all utilities. So thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Brent. The third question we received was, will the methodology for determining WAPA, Colorado River Storage Project, CRM, transmission rates change when it enters the SPP RTO? Please explain. Again, referencing page 38 of the recommendation report. Brent, we'll turn this back one over to you also.
Thank you. No, the process to determine the CRISP transmission revenue requirement will not change. Our rate staff will continue to determine that as they do today for the CRISP or our CRCM system. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Brent. The fourth question is, what are the estimated rate impacts to WAPA network and point-to-point transmission customers? Please explain. And for this question, we're going to have three different subject matter experts answer this, one for each region or division. First, Dave Newmeyer for the Rocky Mountain region.
Thanks, Gary. So to start with, for the lap transmission system, we anticipate a single lap zone inclusive of both our west and east side system, along with the SID-D DC tie. Now, we have done high-level estimates a few times over the last decade, in fact, and those high-level estimates have given us a rough feel for the scale of impact for the lap project. These high-level estimates suggest a lap transmission rate increase due to reduced transmission service from pancake elimination, but also some offsetting pancake savings for the lap project. So overall, we project the lap project to have some increased overall transmission expenses, which is not unusual in a depancaked RTO transmission environment. Now, getting more directly to the question, we have not done a detailed rate impact for each lap transmission customer. Such an effort would not only require estimating the zonal rate, but also would require estimating each individual entity's pancake savings with their particular transmission arrangements. So, just speaking in general, transmission system rates tend to rise with RTO membership because of pancake elimination. But each transmission customer may also have offsetting cost reductions from any pancake transmission service they eliminate. So some entities may have net savings and some may have net increases. And I'll turn it over to Brent to discuss the CRISP zone.
Thank you, Dave. The question is a little bit tricky to answer for CRISP. It is highly dependent on CRISP receiving the specific provisions for point-to-point service. Maybe just to begin, again, stepwise, without any changes at all. We are expecting approximately a 60% increase from today's CRISP rate of $1.75 per kilowatt month. That would be on day one of the RTO membership with the existing footprint. However, in some ways, the worst case scenario for CRISP is where all of our customers join and all of the different markets that we serve. And if that were to happen, we've estimated that the CRISP transmission rate would soar to something about $18 a kilowatt month without having that CRISP provision. As just there's so limited load in the CRISP zone, it would be responsible for collecting $90 million of annual transmission revenue requirements. That's approximately a 900% increase at full market expansion. But that's a very untenable situation. But with the provisions that we've asked for, that risk is mitigated. And CRISP operates slightly differently. It's kind of an unusual utility. And we've long used point-to-point service to meet our firm electric service obligations. And we believe continuing to use point-to-point service may be a useful strategy in the SPP RTO as well, looking at that. Interesting about CRISP is we are by far the largest customer of the CRISP system. We purchase by far the most transmission. We buy it from ourselves, essentially. And that would continue in the future. So assuming CRISP receives approval for the point-to-point provisions and continues with its strategy of using point-to-point for its power marketing needs, which does help stabilize the CRISP transmission rate. Looking at it, all things being equal, the CRISP transmission rate, just a high-level estimate from what I see today, would probably be about $3.50 to some $4 a kilowatt month. So it's $1.75 today. So look like it would be maybe day one and even day 5,000, something like that, somewhere between $3.50 and $4 per kilowatt month for point-to-point service. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Steve Sanders now.
Morning, everyone. Can you hear me, Gary?
We can. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Again, Steve Sanders, the strategic advisor for UGP. And for UGP, we're situated a little differently. As we noted in our recommendation report, we don't anticipate any significant impacts related to transmission rates associated with network or point-to-point. We joined SPP previously in October of 2015, and we previously included our west side facilities in the SPP tariff, and they're currently under the SPP tariff and sold as part of that service that SPP offers. Therefore, any of those rate depancaking that was mentioned earlier or effects of that nature previously occurred when we joined in 2015 to the extent that they did. So as we noted in our recommendation report, we don't expect any significant impacts to transmission rates. The west portion of our system will continue to be in its existing pricing zone, the Upper Missouri zone, that spans both east and west. And the only change that I think we identified is that, as was noted earlier, there are regional cost impacts that can impact your cost of service within the zone. As described in the recommendation report, that is being, to the extent that there's regional projects in the west, those will be allocated across all the western zones. And so potentially the west side portion of the UMZ may share at a small load ratio share in any network projects. However, incremental to today, any network projects that we needed to build from a regional or looked regional would all be allocated to the UMZ. So again, we don't expect any impacts of any significant nature for the Upper Great Plains region. Thanks, Gary. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, thank you, Dave, Brent, and Steve. We'll move on to question 5. Will each WAPA office, CRISP, LAP, UGP, have its own seat on SPP's MOPSI? And for those on the phone, MOPSI stands for Market Operations and Policy Committee. And we will look to Steve Sanders for this one.
Oh, thanks, Gary. The answer to that would be yes. Currently, UGP is a member, as I noted already. We have previously signed a membership agreement in SPP. And as part of that membership, we have a seat on the MOPSI. And the MOPSI is a high-level committee that addresses market and operations issues for the SPP RTO. With the proposal, and if we were to proceed, RMR and CRISP would also join SPP as noted under separate and individual membership agreements, and therefore under the tariff, they would also have a seat on the MOPSI and would represent their particular regions on the MOPSI.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Steve.
Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. The 6th written question we received starts with a statement, and it has 2 parts. The statement is, Markets Plus is gaining momentum in the West. How does WAPA see Markets Plus and SPP RTO-West working together? The second part of the question is, has WAPA considered Markets Plus as a viable short to mid-term option to SPP RTO-West? And for this question, we're going to look to Crystal Dean. Crystal?
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Joe, for the question. So to answer it in kind of the 2-part way, for the first part, how does WAPA see Markets Plus and the SPP RTO working together? Just by way of a little bit of background, WAPA has over many years consistently engaged with our customers, our neighboring entities, and other utilities and stakeholders to evaluate, and where has been appropriate, we've implemented wholesale market solutions that have continued to meet the needs of our individual regions. As many of you know, one great example is UGP joining the SPP in 2015, and then more recently, the Rocky Mountain and CRISP joining WISE in 2019. So in both of those instances, we've successfully navigated interactions with adjacent operating and market footprints, and we would expect the same thing to happen as we moved forward, including those potential seams between Markets Plus and RTO-West and other imbalanced markets. So WAPA recognizes that those market seams will be a critical consideration for efficient market optimization as these markets continue to evolve together, and we'll continue to look forward to working with our customers, neighboring utilities, and other stakeholders as well. And so to answer the second part of your question, Joe, which again was has WAPA considered Markets Plus as a viable short to midterm option for the RTO-West? WAPA recognizes and anticipates that many entities may choose this multi-step approach for their market entry decisions with kind of that short to midterm option as you've described. However, we have experience with a direct transition from a bilateral market to a full RTO when UGP's Eastern System transitioned into the SPP RTO. So we believe that a direct transition for UGP's West Side operations, Rocky Mountain, and CRISP would also be the most prudent and viable approach to address the range of issues we've stated in our recommendation report, and highly suggest that anybody and everybody take a look at that to really get a lot more depth. So our CRISP and Rocky Mountain regions, to answer your question more directly, remain focused on the SPP RTO-West. However, we are continuing to follow the activities in order to remain situationally aware of the interaction or of the market development going on around us. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Crystal. Our 7th received written question is WAPA still considering Markets Plus as an alternative to joining the SPP RTO? And we'll go back to you, Crystal.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So really, again, just emphasizing that WAPA as an organization operates in 15 states, and we're committed to continuing to monitor all market developments and activities in the West. So as many of you know, our Desert Southwest region is participating in the development of Markets Plus, which provides that critical insight and understanding of those intricate nuances as it develops. As an organization, as WAPA identifies the best paths going forward. However, Markets Plus was outside the recommendation of the RTO effort for CRISP, Rocky Mountain, and UGP. So as part of our WAPA-wide enterprise-wide market strategy, our regions continue to engage in and be aware of those developments to ensure that market participation really continues to create the best value for WAPA and our customers. So we are committed to protecting and reinforcing the value of our hydropower and remain committed as an organization to evaluating Markets Plus. But again, for this recommendation, Markets Plus was outside of this evaluation for Rocky Mountain, CRISP, and UGP. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Crystal. The 8th written question is, what is WAPA's expectation of the impact that joining SPP RTO will have on its existing generation interconnection queue, including any transition issues from the WAPA queues to the SPP queue? And we've got, again, we don't have Pete Hyman listed on the slide, but Pete Hyman is the Vice President of Transmission Services for our RMR, CRISP, and DSW, and we'll turn this over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Gary. WAPA plans to continue to process the interconnection and transmission requests that we receive for the Colorado River Storage Project and Loveland Area Project transmission systems per our existing tariff. If a decision by WAPA is made to join SPP's RTO-West, we will then work with SPP on transitioning to their queue, and we'll set a transition date and communicate that out to our customers. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Pete. Question 9 was, has SPP performed any study of the WAPA transmission system, including any recommendations to upgrade facilities to comply with the SPP criteria? We're going to turn this back over to you, Pete.
Thanks. So not at this time. Again, if WAPA decides to join SPP's RTO-West, we would expect to coordinate with SPP on an implementation study. And at that point, we'll evaluate the WAPA's CRISP, CRICM, and LAP transmission systems. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks. Thank you, Pete. Question 10. Does WAPA expect that the Western Resource Adequacy Program, also known as WRAP, WRAP, will be the coordinated RA mentioned in the recommendation report? And there's a reference to page 22 of the recommendation report. We'll turn this over to you, Steve.
Well, thanks, Gary, and thank you for the question. As you'll see in the recommendation report, which also outlines the details of the terms and conditions that we've negotiated potentially with SPP, the current provisions and the current tariff includes a resource adequacy provision. And unless that is changed, the recommendation report refers to those provisions in the existing tariff, only with a change related to a separate loss of load expectation study that would be done for the Western interconnection portion of the footprint. So at the present, what we've outlined is a reference to the tariff. And we are aware that there's a lot of discussions around WRAP in the West, and we are following that with SPP. But at the current, if you'll see, we reference the SPP tariff and the existing RA provisions. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Steve. Moving on to question 11. A little bit of feedback. Question 11, why does WAPA conclude, in a reference to page 6, and I think it goes into page 7 of the recommendation report, why does WAPA conclude that bilateral energy prices are higher than prices generated in an RTO? And for this question, we're going to turn it over to Rebecca Johnson, who is the Transmission and Power Markets Advisor for WAPA.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Joe, for the question. And then for reference for the audience, in a bullet starting on page 6 of our recommendation report and flowing into page 7, we state that continuing to rely on purchases from the bilateral markets would likely further expose CRISP, RM, and UGP customers to higher prices and increased volatility. And so our expectation is that our net energy costs will be lower in the RTO than in the bilateral energy markets. And it's based on multiple studies, including the Brattle study performed for this initiative, also the DOE-funded state-led market study, and the state of Colorado study on wholesale markets. And so starting on page 17 of our recommendation report, and then also included in the Brattle study posted on our website, we identified that using the adjusted production costs as the metric, the Brattle study shows an overall benefit of $68 million, or 26% of APC for the west side participants. And again, that's in our recommendation report. It's on page 21. And then perhaps tying to part of your point, the per unit energy costs are not necessarily lower in the RTO. And this is shown on Brattle study slides 9 through 12. However, the RTO allows entities to buy and sell at prices that are optimized for current conditions. And so that helps, we expect that to help WAPA in hedging against our energy price risk and avoiding the infamous buy high, sell low situation that we can be exposed to in the current bilateral markets as a cost-based and low-cost generation resource. And WAPA, along with our customers, we're vulnerable in times of fuel scarcity, which is in our case, water. And that has been a significant issue in recent years. And although we had a great water year this year, which gave us some space, that isn't guaranteed in the future. And so looking to the market as a hedge against some of that exposure to the high price or to the high production costs, and that is a net of what we buy and what we sell, recognizing that we are a significant purchaser of electricity during certain times of the year. And so going on to the next study, and again in our recommendation report, so that DOE-funded state-led market study performed by Energy Strategies identified, and just putting in comparison, adjusted production cost savings of about $95 million per year for a day-ahead market. And this is across the West. It's one RTO. It's a somewhat high-level study because it was so big in its geography, but that identifies about $95 million in savings for the participating entities. And by way of comparison, the RTO is $695 million. And so recognizing that there are orders of magnitude increases in the potential APC benefits between the different types of markets. And so we recognize that no study is perfect, and they're at different levels of granularity. They have different assumptions. But over the years, every study that we've seen that evaluates wholesale market options, centralized wholesale market operations in the West, reduces adjusted production costs. I should just call it APC for this overall. That's been that. And then also looking to the 2021 study prepared for the state of Colorado under the CTCA, they estimate that for the state of Colorado, an energy imbalance market saves about 1% of production costs, whereas an RTO would be 4 to 5%. And so looking just at the state of Colorado, we're seeing a difference of $250 million per year, potentially. Again, all studies have different assumptions. I'll point to different results, but the direction is the same. And so outside the scope of this question, too, I'd really like to emphasize that for WAPA, and this is really, it's in our recommendation report in a number of places, the market benefits are important to us, certainly, but it is more about the operations, the reliability, and the transmission planning and operations that we're focused on. It's the risk mitigation associated with that. And so for us, the market benefits need to be there, but they don't need to be big. It's the rest of it that we're focused on. And so again, referencing folks back to the recommendation report, to the Brattle study, and if you have additional questions on that, of course, please let us know. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Rebecca. The 12th written question we have is, will a current WAPA customer now have to become a market participant, and how will non-participation be managed? And we'll turn that over to Dave Newmeyer.
Yes, so any entity with load or resource in the SPP West BA in the balancing authority area would be required to be a market participant or make arrangements with another entity to fulfill that role for them. The only other option we are aware of would be to remove the load or resource from the balancing authority area.
Dave, thank you for that answer. 13th question that we have considered to have been submitted related to this process was submitted by a gentleman named Ken Saline of K.R. Saline. And it was in a chat during DSW Desert Southwest, May 18th, rate setting public information forum for the Boulder Canyon project. And what was posted there, the question was, will the current WAPA FRN and the SPP RTO decision on CRISP have any impact on DSW operations, ancillary services, balancing, or integrated operations with PDP, which is the Parker Davis project, for the benefit of Boulder Canyon? And I think we're going to have Jonathan Ost. Again, Jonathan is not on our list here, but he's acting as the your title again, Jonathan, Vice President of
CRISP, Vice President of Power Operations for CRISP, DSW, and RMR.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Gary. Good question, Celine. Ken, I appreciate that. So starting from the back of your question and moving up to the front, so we don't expect any this to have any impact on the fungibility between PDP and Boulder Canyon. We also don't expect it to have any changes to ancillary services, as ancillary services within the WALC BA are provided by systems and customers within the WALC BA. So we don't expect any changes there. I think the larger one is DSW operations. We do have backup functionality that is referenced in, I think, page 23 of the recommendation report. We are working through some options as it relates to what that backup functionality and continued reliability of backup control centers will look like. We don't expect to have any impact to the overall reliability and backup control center functionality. We have a number of options that we're considering that we think will continue to meet the needs of the DSW region and the WALC BA customers. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Jonathan. Those are all the written questions that we received, and we had requested those. The request was made during the May 11th presentation, and we requested that they be received by the 23rd, 2 days ago. And so going back now to, as we cycle through the other questions, right now, if you would like to voice comment, you can do that by raising your hand in Teams. There aren't any raised hands right now. So while we're waiting for that, there is one that was posted to the chat, which I will read. And this is from Joe Taylor, and it's back to Brent. And I think this was on the impact to rates. The question is, you initially said the CRISP rate would rise by 60%, which would be about $2.80. Then at the end of your response, you said the rate would be $3.50 to $4, which is at least double. Can you clarify, please? And to you, Brent.
Yes, thank you, Gary. Excellent question, Joe, about that. I saw that as well, and that range there. And so it's interesting about transmission rates. As we all know, they change every year, depending on what's going on through your system and your cost and who's using what. I think we came up with the 60% using a kind of optimized usage, and you make broad assumptions about what transmission you will be using, what offsetting transmission rates, revenues will be coming in, so on. And a fairly just a broad estimate of what's going on there. In that answer I provided today, I think $3.50, I had done some calculating, and I think, again, there's so many assumptions to be made, but is to provide everyone some realistic estimate of what may happen here. And so it's probably, there's two things, a big takeaway. Yes, the CRISP rate is going up. Is it 60%? Is it 80%? Is it 100%? 100% with $3.50. I think that is within the realm of possibility there. And so not to get everyone's hopes up too high, or just to really express here's the reality of what may exist. And even as we continue to look at this and try to optimize our system and make assumptions, you're coming up with a range of rates in between those 60% to 100% increase. But that's just the way transmission rates go, is that they vary from year to year, just depending on what's going on and assumptions that you make. But two important takeaways is, one, that CRISP transmission rate is going up by some percentage. And the second one, if we have the specific CRISP provisions, we'll have a stable transmission rate. And that's the one thing that we were quite worried about as we look forward. CRISP is in an unusual position where it has very, very little load and a tremendous amount of transmission. And that's a very difficult place to be in for an RTO. RTO, you're much better off with a lot of load and very little transmission. So we're completely upside down. And so we came up with this provision for us and some strategies to really provide a lot of stability for that transmission rate moving forward. So not just a low initial rate and then again a skyrocketing rate later on, which could happen if we don't have that provision. But with the way we've set it up now, yes, there will be an increase, but we believe it'll be stable. And the CRISP rate right now is probably artificially a little bit too low, $1.75. But with the participation in the RTO, the rate does increase, but it'll be stable. And I think that's the important takeaway there. So an excellent question, Joe, but really a big takeaway is that rate will probably be in between that range of a 60 to a 100% increase. So that's it. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Brent. Right now, we do have a raised hand from Kenneth Celine. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Gary. And my comments today will be representing the Salt River, Pima, Maricopa Indian community, for the record. And I have a question. I have multiple questions that I want to be placed into the record. Should I just read them, or should I do them one at a time and we can go back and forth? How would you like to do that?
Why don't we go one at a time, see if we can answer them one at a time?
Okay, good. And again, this, hopefully everyone will bear with me, but we need to establish this for the record. Has the CRISP office ever analyzed EIM or EDAM for the CRISP BA? And if not, then how do they know? Which is better?
Okay, as we're considering that here, give us a moment. Brent, are you willing to speak to this?
Probably someone like Rebecca Johnson might be a little better to do this.
I'm more than willing to wait for you guys to respond in writing if you want, because I suspect these might require that.
Yeah, so Ken, the question, do you have it written down? Could you repeat it again just to make sure
I do not have it written down, but I'm
Okay.
asking the question, since they're making this decision for the CRISP BA, if the CRISP BA had ever, see, 90% of the WEC is going into the EIM and EDAM. And so I want to know if the CRISP ever studied moving it into the EIM and future EDAM markets, if they ever did the study. And if they did, I'd like to see the results. And if they didn't, I would like to know how they can make their decision without doing that. Would you like me to give you my next question?
Um,
Hey, Ken, this is Rodney Bailey. I'll take a quick stab at it. So EIM is comparable to SPP's WEIS, which, as you are aware, we're a participant in the WEIS. So comparing it with EIM, it's the same. And so we have either done that or we made the decision to go to the EIS a year and a half ago. And then comparing it with EDAM, as you're aware, and as Rebecca spoke or will speak, we are participating in discussions with both EDAM, Markets Plus, and other market alternatives at this time. And so we are looking at that. But at this present time, what is on the table is, whether to continue negotiations with SPP for the RTO.
Yeah, thanks, Rodney. Our perspective is this is a decision process you're in, not a study process. So that's why I'm asking the questions this way, so we get a good, transparent record of everybody's interest in this. I think it's critical. Can I ask another question now?
sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, please do.
Okay, so I would like to know if the CRISP RTO office has ever studied the benefits or costs or whatever of dynamic pseudo-tie of the CRISP resource to the CRISP customers who will not be in the SPP RTO footprint. And if they have not, why not? Because that is how WAPA has resolved this issue at Boulder Canyon Project for as many or more megawatts as CRISP. And if they haven't, then it seems like they've left, again, some other options out of their study process that makes this a deficient process. That would be two things they haven't studied, but they're making their decision.
So let's see. I don't know. We've got Brent and Rodney on here. Thoughts, Brent or Rodney?
I probably can take that. So Ken, that's a very good question. We have received that request from some customers to look at that and examine it. I think you asked a specific question about cost to do that. We are analyzing it now. This request had come in earlier this year, and we'd had some discussions with our customers. We're a little bit caught up in some of these ex parte rules around these public processes, but we are continuing to analyze that internally and what that means, and if it's possible. Just as a reminder, all of the generating units have very different characteristics. What's possible at something like Hoover Dam may not be possible at other facilities, and there's some transmission and operations considerations as well that go into that. Certainly one size does not fit all as we look at that, but it is something that we're looking at internally. And I think as soon as some of these boundaries of the ex parte we are released from that, I think we can have a little bit more discussion with our customers on that, and complete our discussions with that on that subject with our customers. So it is ongoing, Ken, and so we are looking at it.
So Brent, again, on behalf of the Native American tribe who has a right to consultation, We do not believe it's appropriate for you to make a decision without knowing these answers and questions that affect us. And then saying, I cannot talk to you, I've made my decision, but I'll come tell you what it is afterwards. I think that's a failed process under your trust responsibility, but I'm just guessing, but maybe you have people like your administrator that can help you out on that. On another matter, I would like to ask you what you're going to do about N-1. Because if you do this footprint, you have a double circuit line from Glen down to Pinnacle Peak. You have a single line from Glen Canyon to Four Corners. How are you going to back that up when you have an N-1 on that line? Have you considered that at all in this decision?
That would be a good question for John Oster, Pete Hyman to answer.
And of course, you realize, Brad, at that time that line goes out, you're wheeling on other people's systems that are not in the SPP. I just want to make that clear so everyone understands why this is an important issue, because you're in SPP now, and now your line goes out, where currently you're in the WEC with all these utilities in a unified operating system under the same set of rules, EIM, and the same tariff, EIM. But now when you go to SPP, you're in a different tariff, a different master, and a different computer run out of Arkansas. So when that line goes out, I know there's reliability coordinators making sure we don't overload things, but how does WAPA going to honor its deliveries and its transmission? How is WAPA going to back that up without some parallel agreements with APS, SRP, others? Because you don't have the old relationships to lean on, I don't think. I don't think you can just flow on another market system without their permission. Anyhow, I'm just asking.
So thank you for the question, Ken.
Excellent
It was
question.
kind of a long question. I think the question started out as, have you studied the N-1? And you're referring to the two lines. And Pete, can you respond to this for us?
Sure, I'll try. So, Ken, this exists today, regardless of the market that we are in. We do have that single line from Glen Canyon to Four Corners. That exists today. CRISP does have some emergency agreements with APS to allow them to use what we call the backside of the triangle from APS's Pinnacle Peak over to the Four Corners substation. So those exist today. We do not anticipate those would be going away. So the market construct, I don't believe, should impact the reliability. I think what you're pointing out is an N-1 event that would exist today if there were problems with the Glen Canyon to Shiprock line. So from a market perspective, will this impact the way the market operates? Likely, yes. But from a reliability N-1, there's nothing different. And again, it's an expectation that the SPP RC and the California RC continue to operate the system reliably, regardless of market conditions.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think that's a good answer, because we all know that by the time you talk to the RCs and everybody else, there ain't going to be no redispatch happening for a long time. And so people like NTUA and others on that line are really going to be heavily affected. My next question, and sorry for rambling a little bit here. I heard earlier one of your professionals indicate the amount of benefits to the Colorado entities from the WAPA study. I think it's 1%, and if you go to full RTO, it's 5% of economic dispatch benefits. Has Western done an economic benefit impact study on all of its customers in CRISP? Have you treated us all equally and looked at the people outside of Colorado and asked what the economic benefits or damages are to your other CRISP customers who have contracts who will not be in the SPPBA? And I'm going to use NTUA as an example, because they are going through significant commercial issues right now due to that issue. Thank you.
Okay, we're looking here. As to studies, hang on just a second, Ken. Give us a moment.
I can take the one regarding the studies, Gary, and if there are additional aspects of that, defer to others also.
Thank you,
Okay.
Rebecca.
And so, Ken, thank you for the question. And you gave me an opportunity to focus on the differences in some of the studies. So what I referenced on the Colorado benefits, that was a study performed for the state of Colorado and specifically guided by the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. And under legislation that requires the regulated utilities in the state of Colorado to evaluate organized wholesale markets. And so I'm referencing that as a study that demonstrates potential benefits of market participants for the entities and compares some of the options such as EIM. Day ahead, they did kind of a vague reference on that, and then compared to full RTO. That was not a study that was performed by WAPA or by any of the other RTO participants. And that is included in our recommendation report. We have links to the actual study. And so I'd like to reference you to that for additional details. It was quite comprehensive, but again, it wasn't related to this initiative. It's an example of a different study. And in terms of breaking down the results for WAPA and what was done under the Brattle study, which was the one that WAPA and the other RTO participants commissioned, is that is broken down by the individual participant region, which includes, so it's aggregated for the West Side participants and for the East Side participants. And then for the West Side, it's broken out by CRISP, RN, UGP, and then the other entities, which include, of course, Basin, Tri-State, Colorado Springs Utilities, going on down that list. And so we do have those results, and those are discussed in the recommendation report in the individual region section. And so if you have specific questions on individual regions, I'm going to defer the rest of those potentially back to the regions. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to provide the clarity about what we studied versus what other entities have studied.
Thank you for that answer. And I'm really glad that you are looking to external studies to help inform your process and that you have put that study into your record, because I think that helps. But again, all it does is really draw a contrast to those of us that are not in the SPP area, that no one has done this for us. There is not a single study saying what's the impact on the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. And I've asked for over a year for Western to be looking at that, and there's not a single one. I would love to find you to go find a study of the impacts of your SPP decision on your Arizona customers so that you can enter that in the record along with your benefit study that you're referencing from third parties regarding the benefits to the Colorado entities. And I want to make it clear, I absolutely am in favor of them doing what they're doing. I'm absolutely understand the benefits to them. And I also understand that, we have to stand up for our share of the resource. Thank you.
Let's see, did we have any follow-up from others, Brent, or?
I don't think so. So Ken, did you have any more questions or needed?
I do have one more, Brent, and I've raised this back many months ago with you. And I asked if you had identified how many contracts this decision is going to affect in the interconnection, because I know it's going to mess with the San Juan Hub wheeling agreement to have an SPP seam in the middle of it. You have P&M agreements, you have wheelings to the bases in New Mexico, you have wheeling to NTUA, you have NTUA solar projects. Have you created a list of the customer contracts and third-party contracts that this decision will affect? And have you talked to those parties before you make this decision? Thank you. I don't want to get into litigation. I mean, the point of it is, if you're going to go off and mess up contracts and get WAPA into decades of litigation because you didn't talk to people first, that's bad. That's really bad. And that's where we're headed.
So we appreciate the things in form of questions. And so we're trying to answer questions. We're not responding to comments. So as to the question, Brent, can you respond for us?
Yes, I will. Excellent question, Ken. But the firm electric service contract. So we believe that no impact. The service you have today will be the service you receive tomorrow. So those are covered. For some of our grandfathered transmission contracts that Ken was referring to in particular areas, we do have obligations under those contracts to continue serving those, and we will do so, carry those contracts and meet those obligations. And we will do that in the SPP RTO market. It's not unusual for entities joining an RTO to have grandfathered arrangements that need to be maintained and for the life of those contracts. We will continue to do that. There may be some operational seams issues that Ken mentioned in the Four Corners, San Juan, Shiprock area. We're working through that. We do have plans for that, to how to successfully mitigate that aspect, but we are aware of the potential transmission impacts, the transmission contract impacts for our old contracts. Of course, those would be rolled over. We're working through a process to do that if we decide to join. But we are mindful of all of our long-term commitments and what it may mean to those contracts in a market. But again, for the firm electric service contract, no change. For some of these grandfathered arrangements, we have plans to again continue maintaining those contracts even if we do join the RTO.
Thank you, Grant.
I have one final question, and then I will stop. And again, I know everyone makes this uncomfortable, but this is what we have to do. So my final question is, if you have not studied the EIM or the EDAM for your Arizona customers, if you have not studied the dynamic pseudo-tie option, which is the NERC and FERC prescribed technical solution for seams issues for customers, if you have not identified the contracts of your customers that are going to become in litigation due to this decision because you jerk your BA out and didn't figure out what the issues are, if you haven't figured out the TOTE 2 transmission flow issues, and you have not figured out how to back up your Glen Canyon to Shiprock line under your new decision, are you still comfortable going forward and making this decision?
Okay, so yeah, Ken, I'm going to take that one. So this is to receive questions to help us inform that decision. So statements that are made that and tried to be made in a question form, but which are really a comment, really need to be made for our comments. And we appreciate getting comments from everybody. The ultimate decision has not been made. And so we're appreciating all these comments that we will end up receiving, and those will inform whether we make a decision and what that decision is. So we do appreciate it. Ken, I did see your hand is taken down, so I don't want to move on if you have other questions, but if you do, we'll take those now.
No, I really appreciate it. Like I say, I've been trying to have a dialogue on these issues for well over a year, and we have not been able to do so. And it really puts us in a position of really just having to do this more formally now. So I apologize for the formality, but it's necessary. Thank you.
I do just want to point out for everyone on the call that the purpose of today's call is to answer questions. It's not to take comments. Comments need to be made, as we've discussed previously. Now, I think we do have another question from XL, from Joe Taylor. The recommendation is to enter into final negotiations with SPP. What other issues does SPP or does WAPA expect to bring up in those negotiations? The second part of that question is, I thought the negotiations were concluded and had all been approved by the SPP board. So I'm wondering what is left. And let's see, I think, Brent, this probably goes to you.
Or I can take it, Gary.
Okay, go ahead, Dave. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Joe, that's a great question. And if we didn't make that clear in the report, we probably should have. So it's a reasonable question because it does infer that we're not done negotiating, that we may have, a whole bunch of other issues to bring up, and that's not the case. It's really a matter of, the issues we've identified are reflected in the terms and conditions that the SPP board approved. However, those are approved at at kind of a high level, and they still need to be worked into actual tariff language and, specifics. And if we were to decide to proceed towards final negotiations, that doesn't do anything, right? We would still need to go into the process of signing the commitment agreement and then signing a membership agreement. And so, since those steps are still in the future, you have to call that future state something, and we feel that final negotiations is probably the appropriate phrase to kind of finalize the working out of those terms and conditions in the tariff language to assure that the terms and conditions as we wrote them really are achieved into specific governing document language, and then right up to the point where we would sign a membership agreement, which actually is the joining step. So that's why we call it final negotiations.
Thank you, Dave. While we're digesting that, there is another question in the chat. It's from Aline. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Alaineg. How soon will you have a link to this recording posted? Same for the transcript. So as to the transcript, that's really a backup to our recording. So we weren't planning to post the transcript. Also, the transcript rights are held by the court reporter and take money to pay to buy a copy of. So, Rebecca, do you have thoughts on how we can respond to when we think the link to the recording might be posted?
Sure. Thank you, Gary. And thanks, Elaine, for the question. We're going to get that up as soon as we possibly can. We expect by no later than end of day tomorrow. And what we experienced in our last presentation is we actually had it up within a few hours. So as quickly as we can, but by tomorrow.
Right now, I'm not seeing any other hands raised or chats, but while folks, I don't want to close things out if folks are still thinking. Rebecca, is it possible to go to the next slide while we're waiting? Perfect. Yes. So on your screen is SPP's high-level preliminary RTO-West implementation timeline. Extensive work has gone into the initial process to create a framework of terms and conditions acceptable to WAPA and to the other RTO-West participants. At the close of WAPA's public comment period, all comments will be carefully considered before WAPA makes a final decision about CRISP, RMR, and UGP. WAPA anticipates making its decision no later than early September. Timing of that decision does depend on the scope, content, and quantity of the comments that we receive. Excuse me. In parallel, the other participating entities are going through their processes to determine whether to proceed to final negotiations. Should the participants decide to continue to final negotiations, each entity will execute a financially binding commitment agreement. Those would not be the membership agreements, but they would be agreements to reimburse SPP for development costs in the event RTO-West does not ultimately go live. Assuming execution of the commitment agreements, an SPP tariff filing would be targeted for early 2024, and again, go live would be targeted in, I believe it's early of 2026. So let's see, I'm just checking a few points here on the computer. At this point, let's see. We haven't asked, we've got a hand raised here. Make sure I know who that is.
It's Elaine Ginocchio.
Okay, could you spell your last name for us,
Yeah.
Elaine?
It's like Pinocchio with a G, Ginocchio. I
Thank
had
you.
the question in the chat a minute ago.
Okay, and did you have anything else you would like raised?
Yeah, from what you just said, I'm not sure I quite understood. So you're looking at a binding agreement with SPP to reimburse them for some costs they've already undertaken, as well as maybe some future costs they will undertake. Can you explain that a little bit, what costs you're talking about? And then you had a phrase, in the event the RTO-West does not go live. Can you explain what you're talking about? Like, do they reimburse them the costs? And if RTO-West doesn't go live, how is that playing into that?
Sure, it's a backstop agreement. Can I hand this over to you, Dave?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, so there's an agreement called a commitment agreement, and the idea behind it is if SPP starts doing the work to expand the integrated marketplace on the RTO across this west footprint, they're incurring costs. And for large integrations like this, their policy is to require a commitment agreement by the new participants, so that in the event if the participants bail or the effort fails, that the SPP membership is not on the hook for the costs that were incurred to expand the footprint, and then it fails and it doesn't expand. And so that's what the commitment agreement is. If if everything was to move forward and the RTO went live, the entire agreement is moot and there's no there's no performance under it. But if an entity was to withdraw, like maybe in 2025, let's say, and then they would have to pay their share of the commitment, so that the SPP membership isn't left high and dry. It's an additional burden for those that are joining the RTO, especially with large integrations. But it's a good practice for the RTO, and once you're in the RTO, it's good that the RTO has those sort of policies that doesn't leave the membership with costs that didn't benefit them. And so that's what that is about. And the membership agreement is a separate process, and it's a separate agreement that we would sign separately.
Got it. Can you give an idea of what this cost is going to be? It's sort of a withdrawal fee.
Yeah, it's on the order. Well, keep in mind, if we decided to proceed and we went forward, there'd be no cost, right? Because it would never be exercised. I believe SPP's. I'm trying to think if this is public. Gary?
Yeah, I don't think that the financial commitment agreement is not been made public, is my understanding. It's allocated amongst all the West participants. So
Yeah.
I don't know that we can give those numbers in this public forum.
I was thinking about the overall number, and it's a ratio share to each entity. I will say WAPA negotiated a fairly reasonable and limited share. And so I think we're in relatively good shape. So yeah, we should probably leave it at that.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, at what point is that information going to be public? Either, that the entire costs versus the allocation, or either?
It's an excellent question. We'll take it back and think about that.
I would assume that it might be the case that if we decided to proceed, that down the road SPP would be sharing the expansion cost publicly in their meetings, and that would give you the overall expansion cost number.
And who are you with by chance, Lean? We just for our record.
I'm an independent consultant, but I primarily work with Western Resource Advocates.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let's see. We've got someone else's hand raised here. I'm having a hard time picking through.
Looks like it's Ken Slee.
Ken?
Yeah, thank you. This last bit of discussion raised a couple other questions that I'd like to ask. So, and I don't know how to frame them without giving examples. So let me just assume I'm someone like Flagstaff load off of your lines, and you make the decision to go to SPP. Is it up to the load at Flagstaff now to go to SPP to figure out how to get that load metered out? Or are they supposed to talk to WAPA first and say, hey, I got the special deal at Flagstaff. I need to deal with APS on their load service? Or are you guys going to make this decision and then we're each on our own to go fix all these fur balls? Or are you actually going to try and identify them so that you can get all the rest of these, I'll call them technical details, included in your negotiation with SPP, so that when you do it, you have the entire list and not just the list of things that you need to fix in Colorado, but actually the list of things you need to fix across your entire CRISP system. And this gets back to that list of contracts. Have you looked at all of the contracts impacted? And are there other things that you should be including in your RTO discussions that you have maybe forgot to look at that then needs to be addressed? And you're the best one to address it because it's quite frankly an agreement between you and them. So shouldn't you address those, or is it up to us to fix? Anyhow, I don't know, Brent, who fixes these things once you make the decision, us or you?
So Brent,
Question, Ken. So
go ahead, Brent. Yeah, I think it was a long question, but I think it is. If there are details that need to be resolved and there were a few examples, maybe you can address the question. Thank you.
I can. So a good question there. And so all of our OAT contracts, so point-to-point or network service, for example, that we've signed since about 1998, they've all had a provision in there, an RTO ISO provision in there, that if we join, then that service will be transferred over. So for someone who's receiving service at Flagstaff over the CRISP lines, there is a procedure to transfer that contract from WAPA over to SPP as the transmission service provider. And SPP has I don't know what you want to call it, but a process for kind of rolling those things over and as they go forward. So it would be probably incumbent upon WAPA to reach out and say, this is what's going on, and these are the steps we need to take. This would be the cutover date as we go through that process. So to answer your question, it would be our responsibility to reach out and make those arrangements. We would be the ones that would be adjusting those contracts. Again, the provision's already in there to do that. We just would be exercising that provision, saying this is the new service provider and these are the new arrangements. But yeah, we would be working closely with our transmission customers on that.
So just a question, Brett, just so I know, otherwise, if you haven't called them, I will. Have you called Arizona Public Service Company and let them know they're going to have to be a future SPP customer for their loads or not? Yes or no?
Well, we haven't made any decision about joining the SPP market. We're just looking at this. And so, no, I have not personally called APS and said, we're looking at this, but you may have to be a customer of the RTO. So, but
well,
again, we haven't
the reason
made any
I asked
decision
is,
if we were.
You just said that, once you make the decision, it's already automatic in your OAT, and now it's entirely up to APS then to figure out the fur ball. And you've never even called them and told them it's coming. So that's why I'm trying to figure out, how do I get people to wake up to this and get you guys some information you need? Because I just think it's a totally deficient process. Thank you.
We appreciate your comment. I don't
comment.
think there is a question in there, but again, comments need to be made as part of our process. We did have another question here. Let's see. Make sure I get read it correctly. Leslie James Ask, please restate the time frame for WAPA to make a decision in this current process. And yes, per our recommendation report, WAPA will review and consider all comments received through this public process, and will strive to reach a final decision by the summer of 2023. We will notify customers of our decision and we'll post it on our website. I had stated that we anticipate this will be no later than early September. Yes, no problem on that. Let's see. Ken, I still have your hand up. Do we have more questions from you?
Yeah, and this is about the process. So I believe some folks, including me maybe, but are raising some interesting questions. Are we in a process to we can engage with you guys on these things, or are we locked out of talking with WAPA about these things till after the process? Boy, I just don't know how. I don't know how to engage in this, to be honest with you. So can you give us some feedback on how to get some input into this process that's meaningful? Thank you.
No, we appreciate that. During a public process, there are limitations on ex parte communications, and so we've got guidance on that. Ken, this is what the process is for, is to get the comments from everybody, the stakeholders, the customers, and others, as to comments they want and information they want to provide to us. So that is the purpose of what we are in right now, and that is the purpose of our reaching out to all of you to hear from you.
So when this process is over, will we be able to talk again, or are you going to go make a decision and then we all find out what it is? That's the part I guess I don't understand. After this process, are you just going to make the decision and then we all go, we like it or we don't like it, or are we going to have a chance to huddle up again after we've had a transparency and a discussion of all of the issues that all the customers have, and then regroup and come together again and see if we can try to eliminate more and more of these fur balls before you make the decision and everyone's forced into litigation? So I'm wanting to know if you're going to have a follow-up process after the Federal Register notice to regroup with your customers and see if you can work through some of these.
Yes, as outlined in the FRN, the purpose of this public process is to gather all the comments and information that stakeholders, customers want to present so that we can make an informed decision. So it has not been designed as a two-stage where we get comments and then we stop and then we go back and negotiate and then come back and do a second process. So that's not the way it's designed. But again, we welcome all your comments. And Brent, we did have, as I understand it, several meetings before the public process began with CRISP. So
that is correct, Gary.
let's see, can we go to the next slide while we're waiting to see if there are more comments or hands raised? Oh, what we haven't done yet is the telephone. We've got several folks on telephone right now. Do we have any comments from those on the phone? Again, if I don't respond to you, then you aren't unmuted, you may have to do the *6 to do that. So let's take a minute to see if we have anyone from the phone. While we're waiting here for just a moment, it may sound like a long pause, but I want to do that intentionally to make sure that we don't have anyone on the phone that's trying to get on. And then also, if any more questions come up, you're welcome to do either type the questions in the chat and or raise your hand. We'll just take a few moments here.
Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
This is, yes, I have Leslie James that you've raised your hand. We can hear you.
This is Elizabeth Arnold. I'm on the phone.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
I was just wondering if the materials would also be available in Spanish or other languages.
Rebecca, can you take this one? Yeah, it looks like we are not transcribing it in or translating it into other languages. Who are you with by chance? Okay. We can't hear. Okay. Okay, it looks like the phone call went away. It looks like Leslie James okay, it looks like Sario audio cut out. Okay, thank you. Okay, Leslie, we had your hand up. Would you like to go next?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Could you go back to the timeline chart?
Yes.
The timeline page?
Yes.
Okay, here's my just a clarification, because we've heard about the commitment agreement, then we've heard about the next another step, the membership agreement. So look at that July 1st noted segment. Is that intended to just be the commitment agreement?
So Dave or Crystal, do you want to take this? I was multitasking, so I want to make sure someone who heard the question can answer the right question. Dave?
Oh, yeah, and I also missed it because I was typing an answer to Elizabeth's.
What, do you want me to repeat it?
Please, yes.
Okay. See the teal bar that says July 1st, 2023? It refers to execution of membership commitment agreement. I had thought from the earlier discussion that there's a commitment agreement, and then later on, at some point, there's membership agreement. So could you clarify this timetable, and does that teal bar just refer to the commitment agreement?
Yeah, it appears blue in on my screen, but yeah.
Okay, blue.
I'll clarify it. Yeah, so the commitment agreement, the idea is that the other entities that are part of the RTO-West expansion effort would sign the commitment agreement in July, probably pretty close to July 1 was the time frame that this is SPP's slide, by the way, that they laid out. And that would enable SPP to begin certain activities to start expanding, start doing the work. And they wanted to do that so that they could keep that April 1 deadline. But we objected in the need to be able to do a full, public process and, consider all the comments and then take necessary time to make a decision. And so we extended our obligation, or kind of the deadline, to sign the commitment agreement all the way out into early October at the latest. Okay. And so we anticipate being the only ones that sign the commitment agreement later than the initial entities would sign the commitment agreement. And then the membership agreement would be down the road from that. And that would be, we would, assuming that we move forward and everything, we would sign the membership agreement probably just before the SPP filing of the governing document changes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it sure does. And if I didn't realize this was an SPP slide, so that's good. That helps clarify. And I would just suggest in your, you probably will, but in your, whatever your decision framework is, or your decision, conveying your decision, if your decision is to proceed, maybe include just a WAPA timeline as well for WAPA activities. So thank you for the ability to ask that question.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question and for the answer, Dave. Aline, we've got your hand up again.
Yeah, it has to do with the question just being asked. So you talked about getting an extension. How does this play in with SPP's board and they're approving things? I thought you had gone to the board for the extension and they approved WAPA until the end of June, I think, to come back. And I don't know if it means with a commitment agreement or come back to them with a decision on whether they're going forward. How does that SPP board deadline play into all of this?
So Dave, I don't know if you can come back on. I believe the extension was, I thought it was till early October, but want to make sure. Dave, are you still there by chance?
Yeah, for the commitment agreement or the board?
I remember a board decision. You had gone to the SPP Inc. board to ask for an extension of time to do something. That's what I'm asking you. And they gave you, I thought, till the end of June to be at some certain point in your commitment process.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how that was worded. I believe the requirement was that we would formally start our FRN public process by a certain date, and it was April, and we got it delayed. I can't remember the exact details, but we did start our public process. We're in it now, and so I think we met that requirement. If anybody is remembering more details on that, that answers the question more fully, jump in. Oh, I'm seeing a note. There was, this also included that the commitment agreement would be signed by the other entities by July 1. And so that was woven into this issue. And so I think the board requirements are met upon the other entities signing the membership agreement by July 1.
Not the membership, the financial commitment agreement.
Yeah,
Right.
Sorry, commitment agreement. My apologies.
Steve, did you have anything to add?
No, Gary, that was what I was going to note, is I think the feedback from SPP was that as long as the process started with the other parties executing commitment agreements around that July 1st, that the board would consider the process moving forward. So.
Thank you. Leslie James, your hand's still up. I didn't know if you had another question or not. Okay, hands down. We did have a note in the chat from Elizabeth Arnold. Sorry, my audio cut out. I was unable to hear the answer to the question about the language access in Spanish, and the answer to that was no. We didn't had not planned on translating it to Spanish. We did end up seeing that she said thank you after that, so I think we've got that on the record. Let's see here. So I will read in here the recommendation that we had. This is the SPP process, was for the board of directors approve the 2 new terms and conditions, and that was referencing the CRISP requirements, and extend the acceptance period for the prior and new terms and conditions through July 1, 2023, contingent on WAPA initiating the process to publish its intent to pursue RTO membership in the Federal Register. And we had by February 28, 23 was the WAPA announcing its intent to do that, and we've met that by publishing the Federal Register notice, which we did say was published on April 28th. So I think we've got the timing questions answered. So let's see. Are there any other people on the phone that would like to ask any questions? Oh, I've missed one here. There was a question in the chat from, I hope I get the name right, Thomas Speech, SPECHT, of Treehouse Investments. And the question is, perhaps I missed this, but will projects currently in the RM interconnection queue finish with WAPA before the Q1 2026 start date, or will they be transferred to SPP? And let's see.
Gary, I can take that.
Thank you, Pete.
Yeah. So Thomas, that is the plan. Depending on where we're at in the interconnection process, our plan is to process what we have in our queue. Depending on where we're at in the actual process, whether we've got to execute LGIA, working through the facility study, at that point, assuming we decide to go, we would coordinate with SPP to make sure there's a smooth transition. Having not gone in there, I'm not 100% certain, but that is the plan. So if the project is well on its way, yes, the expectation is we would finish it up through our process. We would coordinate with SPP to make sure they're aware of it, that they agree with the conclusions that WAPA has come up with through our studies and through our process. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Pete. Let's see, at this point, I'm not hearing any more phone call unmutes. I'm not seeing any more raised hands, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Again, we hope to have the recording of this posted. Will be tomorrow. Noon is, we hope, our latest, and maybe sooner than that. Let's see. Trying to monitor a few things here. Okay, we have a follow-up question. Pete from Thomas Beach. Additionally, will transferred projects be subject to the new OAT?
Gary, I can speak to this if you'd like me to.
That would be great. Thank you, Steve Sanders.
Well, hey, Thomas, this is Steve Sanders. I'm with UGP. As I noted earlier, we had joined in 2015 and had already transferred our GIQ to SPP. So we've gone through this process. And as Pete noted, there is a transition of those projects depending on where they are. If the LGIA has already been signed, then the LGIA stays in place with that customer and RMR and or CRISP. If there's studies that are still in play under the GI process, say, for example, you're doing a system impact study under the RMR or CRISP process, when this 2026 date hits, SPP will have RMR Chris complete that study. And then the next study will transition under the SPP OAT and be done as part of the SPP process moving forward. So that's the transition of the intermediate studies. And ultimately, any GI that isn't executed under the RMR CRISP LGIA before joining would be executed under the SPP GIA under the SPP OAT. Does that help?
It sounds like the response we got was Elizabeth Arnold has a question here. Hi, could you please articulate abbreviations verbally or put them in the chat? We appreciate that. When we were talking about OAT, that's an open access transmission tariff. And when we're talking about GI, those are generation interconnections. I think we've hit most of the other abbreviations as we went through this. We had CRISP, the Colorado River Storage Project. We had RM or RMR, that's the Rocky Mountain region. We had UGP, which was the Upper Great Plains region. LGIA is a large generator interconnection agreement. I think there is, it was pointed out, there is an acronym list in the recommendation report, which would be a good place to look. Pete, there was a CR for the CRISP. In Joe Taylor's questions, there was interaction between CRISP and CR, and I can't remember what it was, CRCM. And can we have someone state for us what CRCM is? Peter, Brent.
I can't. Colorado River, Colorado, Missouri. You want me to put that in the chat? Would that be easier?
Well, I think we've got that. They asked for it verbally or put them in the chat. I think we've covered most of those. And again, if there are some, they can be found in the recommendation report. Let's see, got a hand, Joe Taylor.
Yeah, thanks. The reason I put the initial CRCM is when you purchase transmission service from the CRISP office on Oasis, the transmission provider is called CRCM. So I don't know what it means either, but I thought other transmission customers might get a better understanding of the question if I phrased it that way.
Well, thanks for the clarification, and you gave us another acronym, Oasis.
Open access same time information system.
Thank you, Joe. Let's see here. If we can go to the next slide here. Just one, before we do our last call for any comments, I did want to reemphasize this. The all written comments, again, today's session was a question and answer session. It was not to receive comments. So comments need to be received by June 12th. And responses to those comments will be posted on WAPA's website after the end of the comment period. And once again, following consideration of the comments, WAPA's administrator will make a decision, and that decision, one way or the other, will be posted on WAPA's website. So once again, the recommendation report for any acronyms or abbreviations, there is an index in the recommendation report, so I point you there. Aline, it looks like we have a hand up again. Please go ahead.
Thank you. In terms of the decision, is the decision binary, signed commitments, financial commitments, not signed financial commitment, or is there a range in the middle of not signed financial commitment now because after considering the comments, we feel we have to do some more work or something like that?
So yes, the recommendation is whether for the Rocky Mountain region, the Colorado River Storage Management Center, to pursue final negotiations regarding membership in the SPP Power Pool and SPP Power Pool Regional Transmission Organization, and for the Upper Great Plains region to expand its participation. So that is the decision that will be made, whether to pursue final negotiations. So it's not an A, B, C, D, E, or other. It is binary choice. So
and including to do final negotiations, that means also making the financial commitment. That's the same thing.
Signing that would be the next step, and then after that, if that were to be done, then SPP and the West participants would be proceeding with working through tariff revisions. There would be a filing at FERC, and the FERC process for getting approval for tariff changes. There would be expenses on SPP's part to do what it needs to do as far as software, hiring people, etc., spending money on actually putting the tariff filing together. So it starts the next process is the best way I can say it.
Okay, and so if the administrator decides not to based on comments, is the window closed and they can't be joining RTO West for a certain period of time?
Yeah, the implications of a no, those we will find out what those are if that comes to pass. Dave, did you have anything? Dave went off. So
I was just gonna say what you said. If we decided not to proceed, and so none of the WAPA regions decided to proceed, it would probably be the end of the SPP expansion into the West. I suppose it's possible other entities could coordinate and make it happen, but at least in the immediate future, it would be unlikely.
So asking for more time is the equivalent of ending the RTO West expansion?
Well, if that's a comment,
I don't know that we. Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know that we can predetermine what that would be.
Yeah, like Gary has said, if entities have comments, we want to hear those. But we've been at this for a long time, years. So, but yeah, I guess that might be a comment that some entities might make.
So, Ken, Celine, we've got your hand up.
Yeah, yes. One last question about, I saw this, all written comments are required by June 12th and that you're going to respond to those. And so I just want to understand. So these written comments or questions or whatever we've been making in this record today, will they also be transcribed and responded to in writing? I mean, is it, or is it incumbent upon all of us in these public comment forums to now go turn everything into writing so that we know that we have it in the official record? I mean, do we have to go do this again or not?
And thank you for that. Again, today was not to receive comments. So today was for questions from stakeholders, customers, other interested parties so that they could inform their written comments that they made. So the question and answers, I mean, we're going to have the recording of it. It's going to be on our site here, but our decision is going to be informed based on the written comments that are received by June 12th at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. So it is incumbent upon those that want us to consider those comments to make those written comments as we've laid out earlier in this slide presentation.
I'm sorry to be hard on this. I guess I want to make sure I understand this. So whatever I've said or asked or whatever today, if I want to make it into a comment now versus a question, I need to put it in writing.
That's the way the process has been laid out. We made it clear at the beginning, this was to receive questions so we could respond to them so that you could better inform any comments written comments that you did want to make for us to consider.
And how fast is Western going to respond to our questions so that we can prepare our comments?
The questions have been responded to today, and so so the questions have been responded to today, and the next step is for written comments. And how long it takes for us to process those comments and understand them is going to depend on the volume, scope, and basically content of those comments.
Thank you for that clarification. That helped me a lot.
Yes, so we did have a question and an opportunity for question and answers last at the May 11th, at the end of the May 11th public information meeting that we had. And my understanding is we didn't receive any questions then. We did have the written questions. We made that available where folks could submit the written questions, and we asked for those by the 23rd of May, and we went through those, and then we've had today. So looks like, Ken, your hand's still up. Didn't know if you had more questions. Okay, hands down. So this is our last call for any questions that anyone has. Again, you can do that by unmuting your phone, raising your hand, or typing the question in the chat. Rebecca's been assisting me on making sure we get through the slides. Let's go ahead to the final slide here, Rebecca. And we want to thank you for your time, and we do appreciate your participation today. And again, all the materials associated with SPP RTO FRN are publicly available at the website on your screen. That includes the recommendation report, which is a great resource for all of you in forming your comments. And again, written comments need to be submitted by email or mailed. We need those by June 12th. And let's see if this is the last call. Looks like we don't have any more comments. I'd note that right now it is 11:03 Mountain Daylight Time. And so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and close our meeting. Again, I want to thank everybody for having participated. It makes this process meaningful when we do have the interaction and exchange. And so we do appreciate your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.